Well, we have had a major holiday. We may not have got to celebrate it quite the way we have in the past. Independence Day. You know, there's something about human beings that we don't like to be told what to do. We like to be independent. We like to make our own decisions, sing our own song, do our own thing, have our own way. In fact, Elvis and some might not even remember Frank Sinatra. Some may not remember Elvis. I don't know, younger people. I Did It My Way, famous song. Took the blows, did it my way. You know, that's our nature. You look at a lot of the movies and the books, TV shows, we tend to idolize people who go against the grain. And we make heroes out of pioneers. People who, let's see, what do they call John McCain? A maverick. We like someone that just doesn't toe the traditional line sometimes. That's what we tend to look at as a great man. And independence is a good thing. It can be greatly misused. But, you know, we want our children to become independent. They don't believe that. But, you know, our goal is to get them up, get them raised, get them out into the world and let them live their own lives, following all the advice that we have given them over the years. And maybe find out they may do some things differently than what we have done. We've almost got to the point of maybe trying to worship independence. There's a good type and a bad type, though, of independence. The wrong type of independence is when we try to get independent from God. Now, there's probably fancy psychological terminology for that sort of thing. It's probably easier just to think of it as a simple word, sin. When we sin, we're trying to be independent of God. We're trying to do things our way. This sounds more fun than what God said do, you know. We try to make our own plans, follow our own destiny. So a couple of examples of being independent from God starts right off with the first two people, Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve were the first teenagers. In their mind, you know, we don't know how old, you know, God might have made them in their 20s. They looked like they were in their 20s. They might have been 10. I don't know. The Bible doesn't really tell us anything about that. But their behavior, teenager. God had put them in a good place. There were some duties, you know, like what we said before, we tend to think of the Garden of Eden as where you just sit there and grapes would fall into your hand, you know, and you know, they had to tend to the garden. So there were some duties, but they were not horrendous and horrible tasks, you know. It's a kind of healthy work. That's what Viktor Frankl, a famous psychiatrist, said one of the things that gives meaning in life is work, labor. Very important. Makes us feel like we've accomplished some things. Makes us sometimes feel important. We're proud of what we do. We're proud of what we accomplish. That's a healthy self-esteem as opposed to a sinful pride, I suppose. But Adam and Eve was in the best possible environment. They were healthy, and they were happy. And then the snake shows up and starts the subtle, has God really said that? Well, you know, You know why he said that, don't you? God doesn't want you to know the things that he knows. Now, this sounds similar to conversations centuries later when people get into a secular science class and sometimes not so subtly, the professors will say, "Is that what your parents taught you in the Bible? Because we know that's not true. Those are myths. Didn't happen that way. Here's how it really happened." Of course, then they present 10 or 15 theories because they don't know either. Even their theories are just, ideas. They can't prove any of that. So our theory is just as good as their theory. Okay. But anyway, here they are in their mindset of wanting to be different from what God had set them up as, yearning to reach out to find something exciting and new, maybe. And there's the fruit. I guess it'd have been smarter if they had just built a fence around that thing, that tree. Why was she even there? If it's in the middle, don't go to that part of the garden. But there she is, and it says Adam was there with her. And the serpent says, God really said that? Here's the truth. He doesn't want you to be like him. He wants to keep you down and not be able to know the things he knows. And she looked at the fruit and saw that it looked okay, it looked nice. Nice aroma. She probably wasn't wearing a mask. She could smell the fragrance of the fruit, and it smelled pretty good. See, the Pentecostals don't really use these things because they move their arms around way too much. It keeps popping off, Looked good, it smelled good. Probably tastes good, she's thinking. So, and it was desirable to have knowledge like God. Now, God has told us to be like him. He said, "Be holy because I'm holy." But she's not doing that the right way. She's wanting to be like God. In fact, that's what Lucifer wanted. I'll be above God. I'll be like God. I'll be over God. That was his sin. So, we want to be too independent. We want to be just like God and know all the things that he knows. And she eats the fruit, gives the fruit to Adam. Adam, of his own free will, eats the fruit. But it didn't feel as good as they thought. Didn't work out. They chose the lie of Satan over the truth of God. And this is the same thing people do today. The same thing we have to guard our kids against. They'll believe anything and everything if it's different from what their parents say. Now, the Dr. Cooper, he and Jesse Thomas, two of my favorite teachers, and I was really sad about Brother Thomas passing, but I forgot Dr. Cooper's youngest daughter was Lori. Is that? Okay. He was telling us a story in biology class about Lori was in, I think, maybe around the 4th grade or something like that. And they had come across the word fungi, which is, plural for fungus. And she pronounced it fungi, which is probably about 90% of the human race calls it fungi. And Dr. Cooper says, that's not the way you say that. It's fungi. And she stood her ground. She said that her teacher told her that is called fungi. Now, Dr. Cooper's kind of laughing about this, and he said, now look, class, her science teacher is an elementary school teacher with a bachelor's degree, and, not putting that down, but that is a bachelor's degree in education, and probably had 2 science classes, and they were probably general science. I've got a PhD. I'm teaching college biology at Central and UCA, well, SCA, whatever it was then. He tried to pull rank on her. And, he said it's fungi, and that's what I'm going to call it. So, kids don't always take their parents' opinion. Now, sometimes the parents are wrong. We have to admit that. We're flawed, we're imperfect, we make mistakes. If you disagree, just keep quiet about it. Don't throw it up in our face. We're hiding a speeding ticket from my son. He got a ticket a while back, and we, expressed a view on that. Then we were over in Atkins the other day, and I can't understand. I have passed state troopers on Interstate 40 going 80 and 85, wave at them as I'm going by. Never have been stopped. I haven't got a ticket in 5-10 years. I don't know. The other day in Atkins, I got a ticket. So I told my wife, whatever you do, you don't show this to Christopher, because we had just gave him a big lecture. Of course, is this going on YouTube? Is he going to be? Okay, well, he knows now. Okay. But anyway, we want to pull away from authority figures. We don't like to be told what to do, how to do it, why to do it. We want to do things our own way. That's an unhealthy type of independence, when we try to pull away from what God has told us and we want to chart our own path. Then there's, over in Isaiah chapter 4, let's see, do I have that here? Okay. Isaiah chapter 4 and verse 1, it says, "And in that day 7 women shall take hold of one man, saying, We will eat our own food and wear our own apparel, only let us be called by your name to take away our reproach." Now, Rodney Castleberry was preaching on this back in the 70s at my home church in Forest City. And I guess I was like 18 or 19, somewhere around that age. And Rodney's doing a weekend revival, I believe. And he reads this scripture, and he's going to launch into a good sermon. But he says something about, I don't know any man that would want 7 women following him around trying to grab a hold of him, unless it was Gary Grantham. Then he points at me, sitting out there. My parents are there, my former pastor's there, Sunday school teacher, all these people there, and I'm just sitting there feeling, somewhat embarrassed about all the attention. But that's really not the point of the scripture. It was the idea that Israel had rebelled so much that God was sending judgment, and there were going to be no men hardly left because they were going to be killed. And the women did not have enough men for marriage. So they said a man would have 7 women chasing him, and they would even try to bargain with, look, you don't even really have to be my husband. Just give me your name. I'll buy my own bread. I'll buy my own clothes. Just let me be called by your name to take away my shame of being a single person, single woman. In those days, that was a bad thing, And Rodney's sermon went on into how we do this with our Christian name. We want to be called Christian. We like the label sometimes, but we don't want to live the lifestyle. when I'm doing my ministry there with the hospice, we do what Medicare calls a spiritual care assessment. And on there you have to go into their church history, the family's church history, and all this. And you would be surprised how many adult children don't have a clue what church their parents went to. And they'll start stumbling around, and they'll start talking about, well, honey, what is it? That little country church that was up the road from whatchamacallit, They don't know. They don't have a clue what church their parents went to. And sometimes they'll go, well, we're Protestant. Well, all that means is you're not Jewish or Catholic. It doesn't get into any kind of specifics, really, Christian in name only. We're independent of the rules. We don't like the traditions, but we're not at the stage yet where we want to just be claiming to be an atheist or agnostic. So we'll claim the label. We don't want the blessings. We don't want the responsibilities. We just want the name. Of course, in this time and age, I'm surprised that even people want the name. There are some people now that's the last thing they want to be called, is a Christian, But that's the world we live in today. So, the Jews liked to claim they were the seed of Abraham. They had the name, but they despised Jesus. And John the Baptist was preaching to them, and they said, we have Abraham. We have the seed of Abraham. And John the Baptist said, God can take these rocks and turn them into the seed of Abraham. That doesn't mean anything. Paul goes into Galatians. You have a whole book there talking about their spiritual Israel, the spiritual seed of Abraham, the believers in Christ. So just because Granddaddy's name is on the church roll doesn't mean you're going to heaven. Because somebody was the prophets, some prophet of the Old Testament, they're their fifth cousin. That doesn't mean that they're going to heaven. It's your relationship with Christ that counts, not the name, not the label. And just because they said we're the seed of Abraham did not guarantee them a place in heaven. And speaking of Israel, who more than Israel as a nation tried to be more independent from God while claiming to be the seed of Abraham? Their whole history, where do you begin with this? In the desert, there was the golden calves. We want a different God. They make, Moses is up on the mountain. We hadn't seen him in 40 days. We need something different. Make these golden calves. And then they said, these are the gods who brought us out of Egypt. Now that's a scary thing. I think, a bunch of people died that day. God took care of that. But they said, the problem is that's not independent. They traded independence from a loving, caring God, and they traded it for dependence on a piece of rock. Covered with a lot of gold, but even that's just if we didn't have a value on gold, it would mean nothing, Man-made objects. Isaiah talked about a man taking a log, cutting it in half. If one half of the log he builds a fire to cook his dinner, the other half he carves into an idol and falls down and worships it. And he says the fool doesn't even know that he's the one that made it. So our independence from God drags us into dependency on false things. The golden calves. Then there was we want meat, not manna. God was providing. We don't like the food God's given us. We want something. We want meat. So what did God do? He said, you want meat? I'm going to give you meat. I'll give you meat till it comes out your nostrils. Now, I was talking to a lady one time. She said, well, that's the Atkins diet. Anybody remember the Atkins diet? All you do is eat meat. You can't eat carbs, don't eat much fat. You eat meat, 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 and more meat. And you lose all that weight. I'll give you meat till it comes out your nostrils. So the wind had brought in all the birds, and they went out and got the birds, and then they got sick of that. We want different birds now. You know. Whatever God provided, they wanted something different. We hate Moses. Choose another leader. That happened over and over. In one case, even Miriam got involved with this. Does God only speak through you, Moses? Well, he did that day. Miriam's hand turned to leprosy. I don't remember what happened to Aaron. But God said, you apologize to Moses and I'll fix it for you. So they apologize, and she's healed from the leprosy on her hand. In other cases where there were rebellion, God caused the earth to open up and swallow Korah and the other, start with a J, I think, swallowed them up. You'd think they would learn their lesson. But more and more rebellion came, for decades and years and years and years after that. We don't like the leader God has given us. We don't like the things he tells us we have to do. We want something different. And there was Saul. Now, Saul started out as a good guy, did some good things, but as time went on, the idea of, wait a minute, I'm the king. I can do anything, He went in and got tired of waiting for the priest to come and went in and offered the sacrifices himself, unauthorized. Bad decision. I can do just as good as the priest. I'm the king. I'll offer these sacrifices. Well, got him in trouble. Not long after that, God had said, there's the enemy out there, kill them all. Do not take any of the cattle, the sheep, any of the animals. You have to exterminate them completely. Now, today's liberal Christians would have a cow over that. That's not a loving kind, because they failed to do that, continually failed to do that thing. All that trouble in the Middle East right now, it's going on. They didn't take care of what God had told them to do. And he told them to kill the king, Agag. And Samuel shows up. And what's going on, And Saul says, well, we've done what you said to. Well, what's all this bleating of the sheep and the mooing of the cows that I hear? Oh, well, I intended to take those to sacrifice to the Lord. Well, it may not have been true. He may have been thinking of that's dinner, a big feast. But he didn't take the life of Agag either. And Samuel pulls out his sword and takes care of that. But again, it's the idea that Saul, as king, thought he knew better and knew more of what to do and how to do it than what God had said. Of course, there's the story of the witch of Endor. You know, to give Saul a little bit of a break, at least he was trying to get a word from God, but he went about it the wrong way. He tried to call up Samuel, who had already passed on, and he wanted Samuel to tell him, what's God want me to do? So, like you said, that maybe 10% okay? You know, but he broke the rule. He sought after a medium. And, you know, if you read the scripture there, the irony here is that Saul is the one that had sent the orders out to kill all the mediums and the witches and fortune tellers in the land. He had already, and that's why the witch of Endor didn't want to, she knew when he found out this was Saul, she was terrified, you know. Well, Samuel comes up, but it wasn't the witch's power that did it. God brought him up and said that was the last straw. You know, the kingdom in your life is over. You know, I've got another king. Your history. That's the Grantham paraphrase there, but that's basically the thrust of the message that he gave him. So, being independent from God in the wrong way. Of course, there's Solomon, a man full of wisdom. Starts out good. You've ever noticed how many people start out good and then we sort of slide down? Solomon made some mistakes, I guess politically. He tried to get treaties with different countries around him. With the treaty came a wife, sometimes many wives, sometimes the wives and concubines. There's a story, a little boy said he thought Solomon was the greatest farmer that ever lived because he had all those cucumber vines. Now, this is where you laugh, okay? All right, there's better jokes. I'm sorry. With the wives came treaties. Now, the problem is he let them keep their gods. And then slowly things began to creep into the nation of Israel. All of those wives bringing in their foreign gods, their pagan gods. You know, years later, there's Jezebel, whose very name is praising Baal, the Canaanite god. Jezebel caused a lot of problems, tried to kill a lot of prophets, tried to kill Elijah. Ahab was not a good king. He brought the country into worshiping Baal. It was Jezebel that basically caused Naboth to be executed or killed. You know, he wouldn't sell the vineyard to Ahab. And Ahab was crying and depressed over that, and Jezebel comes in, aren't you the king? Go get it. You're the king. So they cook up a story and accuse him of a capital crime, of blasphemy or something. He's killed. So then Ahab takes over the vineyard. Watch out for treaties with ungodliness. Okay. All right, well, those are a number of examples of the wrong kind of independence, when we try to be independent from God. The right type of independence is when we can be independent from man and the world. Look at the life of Daniel. Now, as a young man, he was captured, taken into captivity into Babylon. He was indoctrinated into the Babylonian culture. He was given a Babylonian name, and that name, let me see if I can read my writing, Baal, protect the king. That was what his name meant in the Babylonian. They changed his name from Daniel to Baal, protect the king. In fact, the other, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, their names all reflect Babylonian divinity as well. I think it was Aku, I'm not sure which god it was. But that was the names they were called. Can you imagine being a godly man like Daniel, and every time somebody called him, hey, Belshazzar, to hear the name of Baal mentioned in your name must have been a tough thing to swallow. Well, Daniel decided at an early age to not buy into it, that he would participate by learning the language. He would obey the laws that did not offend God. But when it came to other things, he made choices. The first one was the food. The king's food, some of it was unclean. He was not able to eat that. Now think about it. He was 1,000 miles from home, a late teen, parents not there to watch over and tell him the right thing to do. And here's some things I haven't tried before. Could it be that bad? All these other people are doing it. The king's doing it. You know, he had a good chance to fall there. But he did not let their culture overtake his religious and his moral decisions. Then when Darius was king, you know, the conspiracy there, they cooked up a thing to where if you pray to any god or any person other than the king for 30 days, you'll be thrown into the lions. Well, that was a law that Daniel did not want to follow. Now, to be frank, I probably would not have had the courage to go out on the balcony. The government's not going to tell me I can't pray. I'll pray any time up here in my head. So I would have stayed inside probably because I'm not as strong as Daniel was. But Daniel goes out on the balcony for everybody to see and prays as he always had. And we know the rest of the story, that he's thrown in the den of lions, God preserves him, he's brought out safe and sound. But he had made a decision that I will not be dependent on an anti-God culture or world. Nathan the prophet, how did he show independence? He showed independence from David's approval. Now we know the story of David, what he had done. Had committed adultery, Bathsheba's pregnant, Uriah is out there, he tries to get him to come home and get a cover story going, and it doesn't work, so finally he has his faithful servant Uriah killed. Nathan comes to the palace a while later and tells a story. There was a rich man who wanted to have a banquet. And even though he had many lambs and many sheep and many cattle, he went and found a poor man who only had one little sheep, and he took that sheep, killed it, and served it at his banquet. Well, David becomes enraged. He says, that man ought to die. Nathan, gives the greatest statement, thou art the man. There's no sugarcoating that. There's no kind of sneaking in the back door with it. There was no... Now, David, if you think about this story, does it maybe remind you of something that in your recent... thou art the man. Nathan the prophet was independent from David's approval. He had a word from God. He decided it needed to be said, and needed to be said clearly so there's no mistaking it. And of course, after Nathan had said that, there was no backing out of it, It's out there. Well, anyway, David repents. And, there's still some chastisement from God, but he's still loved by God, and God forgave him. But, again, Nathan's decision there was to not be afraid of the authority of the king. We look at Christ and his prayer for his disciples about dealing with the world. And should we be dependent on what the world thinks about us, and do we look to the world for our answers? Excuse me. Water doesn't work on a dry throat for me. The Diet Pepsi is about the only thing that works. And church I was at years ago, they thought that was blasphemy to have a soda in the pulpit. And I got some criticism for that. I guess I was being too independent because I kept drinking my diet soda through the sermon, but at least I could talk, which was more important than drinking water, because I couldn't tell why would God be mad at the Pepsi but not the water, We compromised, though. The deacon that was angry about it suggested, well, at least take it out of the bottle and pour it into a styrofoam cup. That way you don't have the Pepsi written on it up in the pulpit. To this day, I don't know what that was all about, other than he didn't want me to drink that up in the pulpit. But it's the only thing that helped my throat. Okay, Christ talks about being in the world but not of the world. We have to live somewhere. But, we don't want to go off into a monastery and lock ourselves up and separate ourselves from the world. We have to still interact with people. We have to live around people. We have to go to jobs where there are people that are not believers. So the idea is not isolation, but it's not overly compromised either. Jesus in his prayer, John chapter 17, let's look at verse 15. He says, I do not pray that you should take them out of the world, but that you should keep them from the evil one. They are not of the world, just as I am not of the world. Sanctify them by your truth. Your word is truth. As you sent me into the world, I also have sent them into the world. And for their sakes I sanctify myself, that they also may be sanctified by the truth. John chapter 15 and verse 19, he says, if you were of the world would love its own. Yet because you are not of the world, but I chose you out of the world, therefore the world hates you. Remember the word that I said to you, a servant is not greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they will also persecute you. If they kept my word, they will keep yours also. Okay, so he's not saying that we should isolate ourselves, pretend that all that's out there and all that's not out there, or we don't want to have anything to do with that because that's bad, sinful people. Jesus went to where sinners were. And this is what we need to do. But Jesus never took up the habits of the sinners when he was trying to win them or show his love to them. So the idea here is that we can have complete dependence on God. We can live in a world full of sin and sinners, because we're sinners ourselves, and yet not let the world affect us. There's nothing wrong with healthy compromises. But that's the kind of thing where you're trying to decide where you're going to eat dinner tonight. What kind of pizza are we going to get? There's room for compromise on those kind of issues. But if it's pray or don't pray, kneel or don't kneel, if it's contributing money to this fund that we know goes over here and persecutes Christians, those are things we don't compromise over. And that's not what we mean when we say go into the world and witness to them. You know, witness means telling the truth to people. Paul's admonition was, in Romans chapter 1, it says, don't be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. The word conformed here has to do with the idea of having an outward expression that does not reflect what's on the inside. It's wearing a mask, or it's doing an act, putting on a show. He says, don't be conformed to this world. Don't have, a pure saved soul within your fleshy body and then act like the world. That's what he's saying there. So, do we want to be independent? Yes, we do. We like to think in new ways sometimes. Nothing wrong with that. What we have to watch out for is how does that affect our relationship with God, and how does that show Christ to the world? If we're dependent on men and the world, the Scripture said something about fear of man is a trap. If we're worried about their opinion of us, then we're dependent on them for our self-esteem and our ego. True Independence Days is when we fall before a holy and righteous God and give our life into His hands and tell Him we want to live the way you want us to live. Okay. We're going to have a song at this time. Roger's going to come forth and stand in the altar, and he'll close the service as he sees fit.